I'll also record the code along. I'm going to probably be doing quite a bit of coding today, so most of the morning will be spent doing some coding. So today we're going to talk about collection views, and collection views are, you can just think of them as table views whose layout is a separate object, so therefore it's customizable. So that's really that's kind of the main difference. It's a much more customizable object. So if before Apple introduced collection views, I think it was 2012. So I think it was what, iOS, is it iOS 6 or 5? Anyway, you can check if you're interested in the history. But the reason they did this was because people were having to do weird things with table views. So there was actually an app called, I think it was called Parse, and it was an RSS feed app that was purchased by LinkedIn. And it was a bunch of Stanford students who actually couldn't get into the iOS course. And apparently instead they hung out at a cafe and made an RSS reader that made them millionaires. Anyway, but that app was quite famous because it had basically rows that scrolled horizontally. And what they did was they took like table views and kind of turned them on their sides, and so that's how they kind of achieved this parse look. And so there were a lot of tutorials like how to make table views do this kind of stuff. And obviously Apple needed to do something in the framework. There was a need, and so that's how and where collection views came in. So people were already kind of doing this, trying to bend table views into this. So the classic example of a collection view is the old school Photos app, and you can see that it's a stack of collection. This is a stack that's I think a section of cells that are all stacked up like this, and then you can pinch to open them into another layout. So Apple's Calendar app is another good example of a collection view. And you can see this is actually Pinterest's app, or like, I don't know if this is the current app, but this would be their app on iPad, and you can see that it has these cells that are staggered. So it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool layout. So I'm just going to go over some of the components of a collection view. So it's very similar to a table view. So you have the UICollectionView controller instead of a table view. A UICollectionView instead of a UI table view. So that's a view object, and just as you can have a UI table view controller, you can also have a UI collection view controller. Same idea. And you can see that the table or the collection view itself has these component cells, and so you're going to most often like create these custom cells. It also has a data source, which is the model. So this is identical to table views, the way that works. And the delegate, which handles events on the like touch events, that kind of thing. All right, so, and then they also have this layout object, and you can see that there is a superclass UICollectionView layout, and the subclass UICollectionView Flowlayout. And basically a flow layout is kind of standard layout for doing grid type layouts, and you should use that layout unless you cannot bend that layout into what you want. And if you can't, then you have to implement then you have to subclass UICollectionView layout. Okay, so flow layout's a given layout, and you can override it and create a custom layout. And you're going to be working on custom layouts tomorrow. I'm just going to be really talking about flow layout today. In my example, I'm just going to use flow layout. All right, so this is a basic view of a collection view. You can see the cells, and you can see where it says Paris. Those are supplementary views. And those are dynamic, so they can be they can also have a data source, and usually you would think of those as like headers and footers. and we'll do an example of this in code. And there's a decoration view, which is essentially a static view. In this case, it's just this background image here. So the collection view is a cell, is a container that holds everything. And primarily it holds cells, and cells are composed of these 3 layers. These are the 3 layers anyway that you need to worry about. So the content view, the selected background view, and the background view. Most of the time you're going to be adding stuff to the content view, but if you want a different, like a selected background view, for instance, you want a different color when it's selected, then you would add a view to the selected background view layer. So you could add a subview to the selected background view layer. Okay, so I'm not sure, you probably will do this. You can just create a UI view and add it to one of these layers. Okay, so supplementary views, as I said, are like headers and footers, and then the decoration view is this background image. So the data source is the same as the table view. So basically you can see here that the data source is going to be asking questions of your object that conforms to the data source. So whatever that is, it's usually, when you start out, it's usually the view controller, but in time you want to move the data source out of the view controller so that you don't have all your code in the view controller. And basically this is going to ask like the question, how many sections are there, or in this case, like how many items in section 0, and so on. So we'll look at an example of sections today. So here's some code. If you have any questions, just interrupt me whenever you have a question. Okay, so UICollectionView data source has 3 required methods, just as in the table view. So number of sections in collection view, so it would be number of sections in table view is the required one for table views. Number of items in section is the number of, I think it's rows in section. So table view will talk about rows, or table views talk about rows, and collection views talk about items. However, you can use rows if you want. Like, so if you have an index path, you can use either row or item. They mean the same thing. So it's up to you. So then the main method here is the cell for item and index path, very similar to table view. And you're going to dequeue a cell the same way. Here's the UICollectionView delegate. So it's going to respond to events. So if the user selects section 0, item 5, then the delegate will fire a method that you're going to intercept. Okay, so CollectionView did select item and index path. So we looked at the table view version of this yesterday in the breakout. By the way, in the breakout, this does pass you the index path. Remember, I got index path for selected cell, I think was the method I called inside this. I didn't actually need to do that because I had this index path parameter. Do you remember I had to change the name of the index path? But then I ended up moving it to another method anyway, so it wasn't really a problem. But. Okay, so UICollectionView Flowlayout. This subclass is UICollectionView Layout, and it's used for grid style layouts, as I said. The default flow layout is automatically hooked up in the CollectionView controller and can be accessed using CollectionView layout property. So also so it's automatically connected to UICollectionView controller, but if you add a collection view and you get an outlet to it, it will by default have a flow layout connected. So don't initialize one and add it, because then you'll have 2. So that's a common problem. There's a property on the CollectionView layout, and that will give you the reference to the flow layout, unless you change it, in which case it will be another layout. So what's the difference between CollectionView added as a subview to a view controller and a UICollectionView controller? So make sure you understand this. So can someone tell me what the difference is between a collection view added to a view controller and a UI collection view controller.
Well, I know the one you don't have to use the entire page as a view controller. So like if you add it to the view controller, like you can customize it more.
Right. Okay.
Whereas if it's just a UI view controller, or sorry, UI collection view controller, then you can't have any other objects on that page.
Right. Okay. And so why is that?
I'm trying to think of how to explain it in a way other than just like on Storyboard, you can change the size of a view.
Okay, so why is it that you can't have subviews on a collection view?
On a collection view controller.
Collection view controller, yeah. Anyone? So the reason is because self.view is a collection view, right? And so that won't let you, that collection view is taking up the whole of bounds of the view. So that won't allow you to add subviews that are at the same level in the hierarchy, right? So you need a base view, self.view, that allows you to add subviews to it, and collection view won't allow you to do that. So it just allows you to add cells and item and stuff to the cells, so subviews to the cells, but it won't let you add a table view or something like that at the same level in the hierarchy, since that thing is the root view, right? So that's the reason.
So you can only add things on top of it.
That's right, not on the same level. So normally when you want a table view with a collection view, you want that to be at the same level in the hierarchy, and you would add it to self.view. Okay, so just make sure you understand this. If you have an outlet to a UI collection view, then you can also access the collection view layout, which is automatically hooked up in IB, as I said. So you can set up static values for the flow layout in Storyboard, and I'll show you how to do this. So basically, you can set up sort of the item size, the cell size. You can set up the spacing. You can set up the insets on sections and so on. So we'll look at that in a sec. So here's a tip. There are static values set to the flow layout in Storyboard that will affect your layout. And you might be surprised that you get unexpected results. So one of the things about the flow layout is that things wrap to the next line, right? So if you don't have enough space, stuff might wrap when you don't expect it. And usually the reason is that in the flow layout in the Storyboard, it adds inter-item spacing for you automatically. So you need to make sure that you either override that value in code or remove it from the Storyboard itself. So we'll look at that in a sec. So the Storyboard's a good way to experiment with the spacing, to see what's happening. So we'll also look at this in a sec. So to set up values that are relative to the view's dimensions, use viewDidLoad. So basically, if you set up static values for the collection view inside the Storyboard, there's a problem with this, right? And what's the problem? So if I just say okay, this item should be 50 points wide and 50 points tall. So what will be the problem there?
You're always looking at the item. Can it be resized?
Well, it's not going to be able to be dynamically sensitive to the view, right? So inter-item spacing you can set to a minimum value, and the inter-item spacing could stretch, right? But if you have a rather small screen, it might wrap. So weird things could happen because you don't have the dimensions of the screen. So if you want to make your items, let's say you want to make your items half the screen width, right? You can't do that in Storyboard by setting the items statically, because you don't know how wide the screen is. So the one way that I guess you could do this is, well, so you're not going to have dynamically sizing items, but in any case, there are serious limitations to setting these values statically. So usually what you're going to do is you're going to do them programmatically, okay? And the thing about the flow layout is that it has a delegate. So that means that you could set everything at the beginning. So if everything is going to be a consistent size. You're just going to set that in viewDidLoad, okay? But if you have dynamically sized items, then you're going to use the flow layout delegate, and that's going to call and ask for the dimensions for each item, okay? So you could presumably you could have some data on your on your model items or something that might know their size or might know some size information. So that's possible. But that would basically allow you to create, for instance, like different sized items depending on how much content they have. You would do that in the delegate. So that would keep calling as you're scrolling, and it would keep asking like how big to make an item. So does everyone understand that difference? So setting the values at the beginning if everything is consistent, but if stuff is dynamic, then you need to use the delegate. And if it's dynamic and it's not a grid layout, then you're going to have to use a custom layout object. So UICollectionView Flowlayout. So you can do things like you can set the scroll direction. Sorry, this is Swift here, but so we'll look at this in a sec. You can set this in Storyboard, or you can set it programmatically. So obviously it can scroll vertically, or it can scroll horizontally. Sorry, these should be non-atomic, these properties. Even the CG flow ones. So you can set minimum inter-item spacing, minimum line spacing, scroll direction. So I'm just giving a few examples here. And so here in line 9, I'm giving you showing you how to get a reference to the flow layout. Okay, so you're just going to call self.collectionView, assuming your outlet is named collectionview, which it should be probably, unless you have multiple ones. And then you're just going to call collectionview layout, and you can cast that to a flow layout here. And then you can start to set the properties on it, like minimum line spacing and so on. Okay, so this is actually some Swift examples here, but it's the same idea. So minimum line spacing, I'm just setting those property values. So here you can see that minimum inter-item spacing is the space in between these items. Okay, and when you're setting the minimum one, it could stretch if it needs to take up extra space. Okay, so minimum line spacing is the space between rows, like that. Okay, so let's see. So here is an example actually of the section inset. So you can see that each section, so here I have a header and a footer on the section, and the section inset has to do with top, left, right, and bottom. So how far it is inset from the header and the footer. Okay? And this, you have this also on, you can set these values on table views as well, by the way. Okay, so UICollectionView. The thing is table views inherit from scroll view. So scroll view also has content inset, so you can do it using scroll view as well. So UICollectionView delegate flow layout. So this is the delegate object for the flow layout. You can also set up this, as I was saying, to dynamically size cells. So here's one of the methods, size for item at index path. So for each index path, it's going to, as you're scrolling, it's going to, like the visible items on the screen, the ones that are coming up from the bottom, it's going to keep calling this method as you scroll. And it's going to ask you for the item, for the size of the item at that index path. So yeah, so here's an example. So it just is going to keep asking who the delegate is for this information, for the layout information. So we have possible, so this is UICollectionView layout. We have like a lot of possibilities here. And basically you're probably not going to write the math for this because there's a lot of people have subclassed the flow layout object and already figured out all the math for you. So most likely if you're going to do something like this, you're probably going to grab someone else's example, unless you want to practice, and then you can try and write them yourself. But yeah, actually I worked on a project that was using the circle layout. All right, so that's the notes. Any questions about this stuff? So it's really a continuation of table view, and this is a really popular, very popular controller that you're going to use a lot in iOS development. Probably the table view is used more often, just because then you don't have to worry about the layout object, but this is used a lot as well. Also, the layout, well, they recently added moving to the collection view. Before they didn't have built-in move, and so you had to write all that code yourself as well. But it's been added to iOS 10, I think, added move, the ability to move cells. Alrighty. So what we're going to do now is start coding. Right, so let me just open this. Okay, so everyone ready to do some coding? So if you want to code along, that would be great.
Is yours a single view application?
So this is a, so we can start by looking at the storyboard here. So what we have is I'm sorry?
Oh, sorry, on Slack.
Yeah, so I have the link on Slack. So just clone it down. Okay, so what we have is a basic master detail view controller here. And what we want is a collection view that has sections. And this is going to be a musician app or something. So what I'm going to do is put each artist in a section. And I've already set up the model. So let me just see if I am in presentation. So, okay, so basically what we have is a musician object, and then each musician object has a photo objects array. So the photo objects are obviously a photo, and they could have other data on them, but for now, I think we only have we actually have a name and a photo. So you can see that we're initting, actually I guess I don't set the name property. Oh, no, it's just the image. So it just has an image property that's exposed here, and you can see that it has a custom initializer that takes the image name, and then in the initializer, we're initting a UI image with that name. So that's all we're doing there. Okay, so then the musician object, you can see that it exposes an array of photo objects here, and it also has the name of the artist and a custom initializer with the name. So that's the API for it. You can see that's what's exposed. And so it has a custom initializer that sets the name for the past and name. And then it has a private method called create photos. And all this does is it checks for the name and sees, this is just a switch statement here, it sees whether the name is Taylor Swift, and if it is, then it's going to call create photos with name. So it's just chaining these methods. So let's take the example, let's imagine that this was initted with Taylor Swift. So it would create photos with name, and it would take the name Swift, okay? And then it's going to create a mutable array here to hold these photo objects. So the musician object, when we init it, it's going to create all the photo objects and add them to its array. So that's its responsibility. Okay, so you can see that it's just writing, there's just a for loop that's less than 7, and the images are all named accordingly. So you can see that the name is, you can see it has an initial 0, so that's why there's 2 digits here in this name. The first part is just the name, so that would be Swift in this case, and then it would be 0, and then the first iteration it would be 1, and then 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6. Okay, so it's 1 to 6. So Swift 0, 1 to 0, 6. Okay, .jpg. So that's corresponds with how I've named the images. And then it's just adding to this temp array here. And then it's setting that photo object array by doing temp copy so that it's not mutable anymore. So it cannot be mutated. Okay, so that's the basic. This is the musician object, which is responsible for managing its creation of its leaf objects, these photo objects. Yeah.
Very good question. If you scroll down back to where you're adding it to that photo object array,
Yeah.
you didn't use self-dot and used it instance.
Right. The main reason is that I'm still in the initializer here.
Oh, okay. Oh, so it's a change method to the initializer.
Yeah. So I don't really want to call the setter method since I'm inside the object and I'm in the initializer. So that's just kind of a choice I'm making at this point. But it would work with self-dot photo array as well. Photo object array. Okay, is that cool? So we have the photo object, we have the musician object, which manages the photo objects. And then what we have is we have another object, which is the manager of the musicians. Okay, so that's going to obviously create the musician objects. Musician objects are going to create the photo objects. So you can see how each object is responsible for creating its children. Okay, so the musician object, you can see that it only has one property, which is this array of musicians. Okay, so you can see that I override the initializer here and I create a temporary array to hold these objects as I create them. So I just add them to this temp array. Okay, same idea. So I'm just calling musician, allocing it with name, and then I have these 3 names for these 3 different musicians. And I have an array of these musicians. Okay, so the manager is going to be, I'm going to send messages to the manager about the data. Okay, so when the table view requests, like how many sections are in this collection view, I'm going to ask the manager for that information. Okay, and the manager is just going to return the count of its musician array. Okay, so that it's going to answer all the questions, and it may need to pass the question off to a musician object, right? It may need to ask a musician object for that information because it might not have it directly. Okay, is that clear? Is the model clear? Okay, so let's get going then. So I have created 2 view controllers here. One I call view controller, which is the master view controller, and then the detail view controller, which is the next one along. So let's just make sure that we set the identity. We have set the identity of the first one to view controller and the second one to detail view controller. Okay, so I'm going to start by adding a collection view to this guy. So just going to drag this out here. Alrighty. Okay, so I'm just going to pin that all the way around. So you can see that I have that little orange line, so I need to update frames here. That's that little button right down there. That's grayed out now. Okay, so you can see that it gives us a little cell here by default. And if we open this panel over here and we select the collection view itself, you can see that this is the static flow layout spacing stuff on this side. Okay, so you can see that inter-item spacing, minimum spacing is set to 10, right? And currently this cell is statically set to 50-50. So I could drag this out a bit so that, I know what I'm doing here. What I can do is actually, is if you want to experiment, you can add a second cell And then you can see how this is going to space with 2 cells if you want to experiment with that. So as you adjust the, say, inter-item spacing, minimum spacing, so that's not going to affect it, you can see. But if I change the width of the item, you can see how that grows until it reaches the minimum item, the minimum, minimum inter-item spacing, and then it's going to wrap it to the next line like that. Okay? So you can experiment with, this is a good way to experiment. You can add a few cells and just experiment to see how these values work. I don't need two protocol cells, so I'm just going to remove that one. Okay, is that cool? Oops, sorry about that. So what I'm going to do is set this inter-item, this minimum spacing to 0. Just because I don't want that affecting my layout. And I'm going to set the cell size programmatically. And I want it to be half the size of the view. Half the size of the width of the view. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is connect up the data source and delegate. So I'm just going to control drag and connect these up. Like this, delegate. Okay, so in the view controller here in .m, I can add the conformance to the UI collection view delegate and UI collection view data source. Okay, so I'm going to worry about the spacing once we get everything showing. We'll worry about that once we get some data showing. Just let's go back for a sec to this cell here. And what I want to do is add an image view to the cell. Sorry about this image view. Right, so I'm just going to drag that out there onto that cell. And then I want to just pin this thing all the way around with 0. Okay, and if I just check this box item of new constraints, that will automatically move it into place. Okay, so what I can do here is I can select this image and temporarily I can add an image from my images. So I'll just add this one. And what I might want to do is change this scale to like either aspect fit or maybe aspect fill is better. Okay, so the image won't be stretched. Okay, so that just is adding that as an example so that visually we can see what we're doing. It's not going to, once this code runs, like that isn't going to be showing right. So it's just for the purposes of designing it. Okay, so let's see. So the first thing that I actually need is I need a property to my manager, and I need to import the manager. Import musician manager.h, non-atomic musician manager. Okay, and I'm just going to call this manager. And I better initialize this thing, so self.manager equals musician manager new. Okay, so now we have the manager. That's good. So the other thing that we're going to need is we're going to need a custom cell. So we better go ahead and create the custom cell. So I'm just starting to think, okay, I'm just like my mind is starting to think about the data source, and I'm thinking about the number of items, but then I'm thinking, well, I don't have a custom cell. So I better go ahead and create that. So just type UI table view, UI collection view cell. Like that, and I'll just leave the suggested name collection view cell. It's fine. I only have one of them. Okay, so I'm just going to jump into the storyboard again and select the cell from the document outline over here on the side. and then just set its identity to that cell. It's this guy here. And while I'm here, I better set the reuse identifier on it. Okay, so I'll just set that to cell. So that's fine. Let's see. Ready. So we're going to have to import cell into the view controller to use it. So I'll just do that. Collection view cell.h. Okay, so I haven't set up any outlets or anything in the cell yet. I'll come back to that in a minute. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to start dealing with some of these data source methods. So I'm going to do number of sections in CollectionView. And here what I'm going to do is return self.manager number of sections. Okay, so number of sections is not implemented and it needs to return an NS integer. So I'm going to go over to the manager and add this method. So it returns an NS integer. Right, I could pass the collection view in there if I have more than one, but I don't, so I'm not going to bother. Okay, so we just need to implement this. Just let me make a bit of space here. Okay, so this thing is just going to return self.musician array dot count. Okay, so that will correspond to the number of sections. So do you see how the musician object has is being asked this question? Now, what we could have done is we could have made the musician manager the data source, and then these methods, we wouldn't be calling these methods in the view controller here. So this method would be straight on the manager. So that's actually the way to do it, but I'll leave that as an exercise for you. I don't want to confuse people. So if I recommend that you move this into the manager object. So then we wouldn't need to call from here into the manager. We would, since the manager would be the data source, the table view would know to call this method on the manager. Okay, is everyone clear about that? So I would have had to say here though, self.manager.data source equals, self.collection view. So you can see I don't actually have an outlet to the collection view, so that is something I forgot to do. Let's just make sure that we have that. So control drag from the collection view. Just one sec. Sorry, I'm in the collection view. Sorry, question?
I'm just a little bit behind of where you were typing. So you made that method in musician, the
musician manager.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I'm never going to talk directly to the musician. I'm only ever going to talk to, so the view controller is only going to ever talk directly to the manager, not ever to the musician, or never the photo object directly, right?
Right. And all you did there was just return the array.
The count of the array, yeah. Okay, so I need an outlet to this collection view here, so I'll just go up here and call this collection view. Okay, so just, if you only have one collection view, just call it collection view. Then you'll always know what the name is. You won't need to go hunting for it. So by adopting conventions like this, you reduce the friction of rooting around trying to find names, right? When there's no reason for it to have a name other than collection view.
This is a controller.
Yeah, in the interface.
And you drag from the collection view to the.
Right. So from the collection view, not the cell, right? Yeah. Okay, so now you can see I do have that reference to the collection view. So where was I here? I can't remember why I got there, but anyways, I realized I needed a reference to the collection view. I'm sure we'll come back around to whatever it was I was doing. yeah, there was something here I was doing, but okay, so let's just keep going. So there's number of sections, and there's also this method. If we start typing number, we can see that number of items in section is the next method. Okay, so again, this is expecting an S integer, and I'm just going to return self.manager, and then I'm going to have a method number of items in section. Oops. I'm just going to have this method. So I'm just going to copy it. Number of items in section, and then I'm passing in section here. Okay, so this method returns an NS integer, and it takes an NS integer as the section number. Okay, so I'm just going to ask the manager again for this information. Paste this in. So number of items in section takes an NS integer section, and it returns an NS integer. Okay, so you can see how I'm just literally forwarding these calls to the manager. Okay, so I'm going to jump into the implementation file.
Sorry, can you just move very fast?
Yeah.
Go back to the musician manager.
.h?
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
.m.
So all I did was in .h, I just copied this method signature right here. So this part of the signature I'm just not using the first part, which is, what's the first part of this method? So this is a data source method, right? So what is this first part of the method here? Collectionview, UICollectionView, star collectionview. What is that? That's right. So it is the collection view who is the delegator, right? We are the delegate. So remember I said by convention, the delegate always sends itself as the first parameter. So that way we know which collection view is asking us. So if there were more than one collection view, we would have a reference to the one that was calling us, and we wouldn't need to track which one was calling us. So that's why they pass that in. Okay, so I'm ignoring that first part of the message because I don't need to worry about that. I only have one collection view. So I'm just taking this part and forwarding the call to the musician manager. So that's that number of items in section. Okay, so this is pretty simple here, right? So my sections correspond to my musician array. So if I grab a section, that will correspond. So if it's section 0, it'll be the first musician in the array. The section is 1, it'll be the second musician in the array, and so on, right? So I can simply ask for, so the musician array has a photo object array, right? So this returns a musician object, this part, and that musician object. So let me just do that. Let me do a musician. So this will get us a musician. Okay, and then what we want is we want the count of the photo object array. So we can just return musician dot photo object array dot count. Okay, does this make sense? I could musician. Does that look right? I'm missing the I here. Okay. Right. Okay. So this is dealing with sections, right? So the sections correspond to the array of musicians. So each one corresponds to a section in the collection view. And then, so I get the item so number of items in section is going to be calling me with section, I'm in section 0. Give me the items for section 0. Give me the item count for section 0. Give me the item count for section 1 as I'm scrolling. So if I'm in section, suddenly I got to section 2, it's going to say, okay, give me the item count for section 2. Okay, so I'm just forwarding this call to the musician manager who knows about this information, right? It actually doesn't know about this information because it's asking its children for this information, right? So it's passing the call on. It has this musician array which has a count on it of photo objects. So I guess it does have that knowledge. Okay, so number of items in section. So we've got our two methods, our two required methods. So one of the things is that you can go to, if you command click on this, you can see that this is the protocol to UICollectionView data source. You can see that this is the declared protocol here, and these are the required methods. So if you need to know what the required methods are, so you can see that number of sections is not actually a required method, but you should always implement it anyways. So by default, it will return, like it defaults to 0, like 0 sections or 1 section. So you don't need to implement it, but it's best to do so. Okay, so then we only have one other method, which is the collection view cell for items at index path. So let's just implement that. So if we just start typing cell for items, I think it's this one, cell for items at index path. So you can see that's expecting a cell. Okay, so we need to create a cell and then set its data. That's what this method does. So did we import the cell? We did. So collection view cell. So I'll just call this cell. And then what we want is collection view DQ, reusable cell with identifier. So we can see that there's DQ supplementary view of kind. So that's not the one we want. We want this one. Okay, so here it just wants an identifier. I'm just going to not worry about that, making it a static this time. I'll just type in a literal cell. And then this is just index path here. Okay, so the next thing we want is to get the data for the index path. So what we want is we're going to ask the manager here, and this is going to return a photo object. So we're going to need to import photo object. Photo object. Okay, so here we're going to do self.manager. Let's do photo object at index path, and then pass it the index path. Okay, so we have to implement this method. So you can see that, you can see the pattern. So this is going to return a photo object. And the thing is, the compiler doesn't know anything about photo objects, so we need to do an @sign class here, photo object. And let's import it if it isn't imported, and it isn't, so we'll import photo object here. Okay, so photo object. So this is going to return a photo object at index path, so we need to make this parameter an NS index path. Okay, so that looks fine. Let's just copy that over into the implementation. Okay, so what we need is we need to get the musician from the index path, so that would correspond to the section. So if we do index path dot section, okay, that's going to be the section. So this is actually just an NS integer. I'll just break it out like in steps here. So that corresponds to the section, and then I'll do NS integer row, or actually I'll just do item. Okay, so this would be just index path dot item. And as I said, you could use row here, it's acceptable. So I'm just breaking this out, index path, bundles, section, and row. So whatever the section is that we're in is going to be held in this variable. Whatever the item is will be held in this variable. So the first thing I'm going to do is get the musician for self.musician array, pass the section to it. Okay, so now I have the musician, and now I need to get the item from its array. So that's going to be a photo object. Sorry about that. Sorry. Where was I here? It was in the manager. Photo object equals. So here's musician that has a photo object array, and then we're just going to pass the item to that guy. And we're going to return photo object. Okay, is that clear? Well, I'm recording it, so you can look back. Yeah.
So all this will be recorded.
Yeah, I'm recording it. Hopefully it won't work out or something. Okay, so self.photo manager. So let's see what is the problem here. So we have the cell, and it looks like we might not have the right method. Let's see what this is saying. So this doesn't seem to be the same method as the one in the photo object. Let's see. Oh, because I thought I did this in the musician manager.
And you cut it.
Oh, I cut it. Okay, I'm sorry about that. Yeah. Okay, so just paste it in there, and there we go. So let's go back to the view controller. Okay, so it's all good. Okay, so now we have the photo object, and that has the image in it, and we need to set that on the cell. So we better get an outlet on the cell. So let's just go back to the storyboard here, and let's open the custom cell class. Okay, so this is a custom cell class. And I'm going to set this thing directly. Yeah, I'm going to set it directly in the header. So we're in the implementation. Oh, actually, no. I'm going to do this a bit different. So in the header, I'm going to do a property here that's going to be non-atomic, and this is going to be a photo object. Photo object. Okay, so I'm going to do an @ class here. Photo object. Okay, I think that looks fine. So what I want to do here is when the photo object gets set, I want to set the outlet on it. Okay, so I'm just going to make an interface here that is on class extension. So @end. Okay, so this is where I'm going to add the outlet to the this image view. So I'm just going to call it image view. And what I'm going to do is, let's just see if I can go back. Sorry about that. So I'm back in the cell here. What I want to do is override the setter on photo object. And so when photo object gets set, I want to set that outlet. So set. So not sure, I'm not getting autocomplete here. That's the reason. We'll just see what's going on. Just try to build. Okay, so that's fine. Okay, I'm not sure why I'm not getting the setter coming up. Atomic photo. Oh, I know why. Because I didn't import it. So photo object. So I think that should solve it. Set photo object. Okay, so in the setter here, what I'm going to do is set photo object. So make sure I set the backing store of the photo object. So make sure I do that, otherwise I won't have a photo object. And then what I'm going to do is self.imageview.image equals photo object.image. So photo object has an image property, and that's just being set to the label when this photo object gets set. So this is a good example of overriding a setter. You don't necessarily, like, I'm going a little bit off a little bit more into just kind of showing things that just for your information. Like, I'm not expecting you to do this, like, say, on the test. Okay, so we're going a little bit, like, I'm going beyond, like, the essentials that you need for the test. So in the test, you may want to have your model object in the view controller and whatever. That's totally fine. This is, like, I'm just kind of demonstrating here, so don't worry. Okay, so let's go back to the view controller, and here what I want is I have an instance of the cell. So the cell has cell.photoObject equals photo object. Okay, and then I can just return the cell. Okay, so I asked the manager for the photo object at index path and passed it the index path, and it sorted everything out over there, right? It's like, this guy doesn't need to know about, like, data stuff. Like, it doesn't need to know that there is an array at this section or that it's an array of musicians. It's completely opaque to this object, does not need to know that stuff. So it's asking the manager, which is the data model object, to handle this problem. And it just returns a photo object that we hang on to with this variable, and we set it on the cell. So let's see, am I missing anything? Let's try and run it. Okay, yeah. So this looks good. Set that. Yeah, this looks fine. Not sure exactly what's going on here, but oh, I see. Seems to be, is that cutting off at the bottom? Or I guess it's just my window, I think. Sorry about this. All right, so it's roughly working. The spacing is off. So what I would like is I would like these to be square, and I would like them to take up half the window. So let's just go back and fix this. So in ViewDidLoad here, yeah, in ViewDidLoad. Oh, sorry, this looks like it's gotten screwed up. Okay, so in ViewDidLoad, what I want to do is get a reference to the flow object. So if I do self.collectionView. If I start typing layout, we can see that Collectionview layout is right here, and that is a subclass of UICollectionView layout. In our case, this is actually a flow layout, so I can cast this to a UICollectionView flow layout. And I'm just going to hang on to this with a variable here. Okay, so just need a semicolon. Right, I'm missing a bracket there. Okay, so now I have a reference to this layout. So what I can do is I want the, so I set the inter-item spacing, I think, to a 0. So what's happening right now is that the items themselves are getting a size from the storyboard, and then they're spacing out that inter-item spacing so that it obeys the size of the items and also where they, I guess, where they're sitting in terms of the edges. So what I want here is I need half of the width of self.view. So self.view dot, I can do frame dot size dot width, and I want to divide this by 2. So this is going to be a CG flow value. Okay, so here what I want is do layout. So if I look up UICollectionView Flowlayout, we can see that the different properties. Let me just drag it into the middle a bit. So we can see scroll direction, minimum line spacing, minimum inter-item spacing. The one that I want is item size. And you can see that this is going to be a CG size. Okay, so I've got to get the size. So let me just do CG size. So this is easy. I just do CG size neg and then pass in width and width because I want them to be the same. I want it to be a square. So then I just do layout dot item size equals size. Okay, so let's run that. All right. That looks good. Let me just scale it down a bit more so we can see the whole thing. Okay, that looks good. So let's take a break here. The next step that we have to do is set the, we want to pass the data item to the detail view with a segue and set the image on that detail view. Okay, so let's work on the section headers next. So what we can do is we can select the collection view itself, and there's actually something in the storyboard here, accessories section header. Okay, so that added this section header right here, and you can see that it has a reuse identifier, and it also has a class UICollectionView reusable view. Okay, that's the vanilla class that it comes with. So we're going to, just like a cell, so this is actually the superclass of a collection view cell, is this UICollectionView reusable view. So the cell inherits from this, so it's a subclass of it. So we're going to subclass UICollectionView reusable cell to make our custom header, and then we'll set the class on it. So let's do that. So UI collection view, what was it? I always forget the name of this. UI collection reusable view. There we go. So I'll just leave the default name collection reusable view. Click next. Okay, so this is just going to be exactly like managing the cells. So in this case, I already showed you how to override a, well, I'll do the same thing. So I'm going to do @class here, @class. And this is going to be what? What object? What data object? So we only have 2 types of objects, right? We have musicians and we have photo objects. So this is going to be what? Really?
Well, isn't it gonna be
That
based
only
on
leaves
the
a
number
musician, right?
Well, I was thinking it's based on the number of. Like,
So think
photos
about
per
who's the
section.
manager of the sections. It's the musician object, right? Because it has an array of musicians, right? And each of those musicians corresponds to a section, right? So it makes sense that the musician is the object that is responsible for the data for the section, right? So in our case, we're just going to use the name of the musician for the section. So we're going to have to do an @sign class on musician. And then let's just make sure we import that. Let's see, what am I getting? Some sort of, just do a build here quickly. So musician.h. And what I want is a property for that's non-atomic, and this is going to be a musician. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do set musician. So for now, I'm just going to do musician equals musician. Okay, so whatever musician is passed in, it's going to assign it to the backing store of our property. But we want to use this to override our label. So we're going to do an interface here. And we're just going to make an interface of collection reusable view. And this is going to be an outlet to a label. So we got to set that up in Storyboard. So let me just jump over to Storyboard. Okay, so first thing is we want to just set the class to this custom class. So collection reusable view was the name of that class. So we'll set that. And then the other thing that I want to do is I want to just add a view to this collection, to this reusable view cell. Okay, so I just dragged it in there, and you can you can always make sure it's in the right place by looking at the document outline there. You can see it as a subview of collection reusable view. Okay, so I'm just going to pin this all the way around 0, 0. Okay, and then just items of new constraints, so click that. And so here what I'm going to do is change the background on this to the background color to black. And then I'm going to add a label. So it's a wee bit small there. I can zoom into this. So this label, obviously we need to adjust the color of this label first of all. So I'll switch the color to white. And then I'm going to make this just a bit bigger. So here's a tip. Labels and buttons have an intrinsic size. And so when you like change the text inside of this, it will kind of truncate like this. So you can just hit Command equals and it will resize that for you. Okay, so I'm just going to center this in its subview. So if I just click on the alignment icon here, I can just set this up. Okay, so I can actually immediately center this. Okay, so that looks good. So let's just get a, and I have some, see how it's drawing on the screen? It's weird. Okay, so I'm just dragging this out. I am in Collectionview, collection reusable view.m, and I'm in the interface that I made, and I'm just going to call that label. Okay, so I better set that label now. Self.label.text equals musician.name. So the musician object, remember we had a custom initializer on it and we passed a name to it and we saved that name as a property. So we're just asking musician object that was passed in for its name. So now we need to get a musician object into this custom cell. So first of all, we need a reference to the custom cell, and then we need to set this property that's exposed in the header, the musician object. So let's go back into the view controller. So this is very similar to getting a cell in, so cell for row. So if we type cell for item, collection view. So I think it's just, no, sorry about that. So what we want is the cell for item one that returns sorry about this. Cell for item. So that one returns I'm just trying to find this method here. I can't find it. So when we did cell for item, cell for item at index path, UICollectionView cell. So that's not the method we want. We want a method that returns. So it has to return a UI collection view, UI collection reusable view, and it is going to be collection view. So it's this method here. Now it's auto completing. So it's this method right here. You can see it passes in the collection view, and it's view for supplementary view of kind. So we need to import the collection reusable view. And here we're going to create a collection reusable view. And we need to call collection view to DQ a reusable view of supplementary kind. So this wants a reuse identifier, so I didn't actually set that. So let me just go back and select the supplementary view and make sure the reuse identifier is set to cell. You can set it to whatever you want. Okay, so I'll start by passing cell, and then the index path is just going to be the index path. And it wants this supplementary view of kind, and this is some sort of string value, so I don't know what this is. So I need some help here. So I'm going to option click. It seems to be lagging a bit. So let's see. I'm just going to try typing something here. I'll try typing kind. Collection. There we are. So I just tried typing something, collection view, and we see UI collection view element kind section header or footer. So ours was a header. Okay, so now we have that view, which is a reusable view. So we can just do view dot musician. And so this wants a musician. So we better get one of those. Musician. Musician. And we're going to ask the manager for this musician object. So we have an index path, so we can pass it that index path. So we can do supplementary view at index path. Let's say self.manager or how about just musician. Did I have a musician? I may actually have a method I can reuse. Hang on. I don't have a method that returns a musician. So let's just make one. So we do have an outside class musician. So musician. Let me just do musician add index path. And then this would be ns index path. index path. Okay, so this is easy, right? Because the index path dot section will correspond to the musician in question. So I'm going to ask I'll just ask self dot musician array for this item, and I can just return. I can just return that musician at that section. Okay, let's see, where was I? Musician at index path, and then just pass in the index path here, and then just assign musician. Okay, so then we need to return the view, since this method wants us to return that view. Okay, I'm going to run that and see if it works. Okay, so that works. Okay, so quickly let's just do the, so that when we tap on a cell, we can segue. Right now, this object, so we've demoed, so how would you like me to demo this? With a prepare for segue again or programmatically? So far, I think that David Mills showed just the drag method from the cell. And yesterday I showed the drag method from the view controller proxy object, okay, using perform segue with identifier. And then we intercepted prepare for segue and did our stuff in there. So the third way is that I could create this view controller programmatically. So shall I do the third way, since we've already seen examples of the two other ways?
Sure.
So this is sort of building on the view controller lecture where I demoed the three ways, and it kind of like was a lot, right? So just kind of coming back around to all these. So to do that, we need to set the, so we need to, its view controller is set in the identity inspector here, but what we need is we need a storyboard ID, which you can see is right there. And I'm just going to use this name, detail view controller, for the storyboard ID. Okay, so I need the storyboard ID. The thing is that if you simply initialize the class here, the detail view controller class, this will not work. So I guess I could probably quickly demo that. So in viewController.m, we want, sorry, I seem to be in .h. What the heck's going on here? Where's all my view controller stuff? This is weird. Did I accidentally delete something? I'm in view controller. It looks like I'm in Dodge. What's that?
It's all gone.
Seems to be. Is that running? Hang on, let me just run it again and see. It's just like the, oh, I see. No, it's folded. It's code folded. Okay. It's like, oh, it's working without the code. This is a miracle. All right. So yeah. So where was I? Right. So let's just go to view controller. So what we want is we want the data source method did select item at index path. Okay, so that will give us this item at index path. So we can, so first of all, let's go to the detail view controller really quickly. So it doesn't have a property, so it's going to have a @class. This is going to be a musician, so I better import the musician. Well, actually, no, this is not a musician. This is a photo object. Photo object. Import photo object. Okay, so then I better make a property. Non-atomic photo object. Photo object. And what I want here is I have an image view outlet, so I want to ask the self.photo object dot image. I want to set that image to self.imageview.image, like that. Okay, so that's setting the detail view up to receive this object, so it's very simple. So here I've selected this row, so what I need is I need the photo object that corresponds to this index path, self.manager. So let's see if manager has a method for that. So it does photo object at index path, so I can just call this method. Photo object at index path and pass it the index path. So that will get us that photo object. So now we need to create the detail view controller. So I'm going to show you the wrong way to do it first. So detail, so we've got to import it. Okay, so detail view controller, DVC equals detail view controller new. Okay, so this is the wrong way to do it. So let's do dvc dot photo object equals photo object, and let's run it. Hang on. The collection view did select item. I think this is not working. Hang on. Okay. Oh, right. So I'm sorry. So we need to do, we need to actually, so we've created it, we need to push to it. So DVC, so self.navigation controller, push view controller animated. So we want the DVC and then animated, yes. Okay, so we have a blank screen. So basically, when we segue over here, we're creating this new object, but the problem is that the detail view controller. So let's see if its view did load gets hit. So its view did load is hit, but let's have a look here and see what's going on. We look in self, we can see that the image view is null. Okay, so that's impossible for image view to be null because image view is set up here and we're in view did load. So that means that we have created an object that does not have an outlet at all. Like the outlet is not available because what we need to do is ask the view controller to create itself, to create this scene. So we could have some sort of override on the initializer on this view controller that would make sure that it initted that storyboard scene. We could do it that way too, but that seems a little opaque, I would say. Okay, so let's go back and do it the right way. So this is the problem, this line right here. So we need to do self.storyboard, instantiate view controller with identifier, and here we know, because I always name it the same as the view controller, that's controlling it. I always name it the same. You can name it whatever you want, but by convention, I name it this way so that I never need to worry about it. Okay, so this it asks the storyboard to instantiate the detail view controller. And once it does that, then we are free to work with it. Okay, so see this, how when we come back, how it overlaps like that? Okay, so this I was talking about yesterday, and this is a problem with clips to bounds. So you will often see this and be pulling out your hair. It's kind of a hard thing to ask on Stack Overflow. Like, how do you phrase the question exactly? It's a little bit hard. So yeah, it can be a problem. So if you just go to the view controller itself, select the image, and just go down to the image properties here. And we want, let's see, sorry, it is the image view. I'm not seeing the properties on it. Hang on. Clips to bounds is right there. Okay, so if we just, you can set that programmatically as well. And it stops the image from spilling out over its boundaries. Okay, so all working. Okay, I think I'll stop there. So I'll post the